I'd always thought my life was a good one. Not perfect, mind you, but solid. My name's Daniel, and I've been married to Claire for 12 years. We met in college, her with her bright green eyes and that laugh that could light up a room, me with my awkward charm and a decent knack for fixing things. I'm a mechanic by trade, hands always stained with grease, while Claire works in marketing, all polished and professional. We built a life together in a modest house on the edge of town, with a little garden she loved tending and a garage I turned into my sanctuary. 2 kids, Ellie, 9, and Max, 6, completed the picture. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours. Lately, though, something felt off. Claire had been distant. She'd come home from work later than usual, her phone buzzing more often, and she'd brush it off with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I chalked it up to stress. Her firm had been pushing some big campaign, and she'd always been ambitious. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife, the mother of my kids, the woman I'd vowed to stand by. But trust, I'd soon learn, can be a fragile thing. It started with small things. A whiff of cologne on her jacket that wasn't mine. Some sharp, expensive scent I'd never wear. A receipt in her purse for a dinner I didn't remember us having. I'd ask, casual-like, and she'd laugh it off. "Oh, that client meeting," she'd say, waving her hand. I wanted to believe her. I did believe her, but the doubts crept in like shadows, pooling in the corners of my mind. I'd lie awake at night, her soft breathing beside me, wondering if I was imagining it all. Then came the day I couldn't ignore it anymore. I'd come home early. Shop was slow, and I figured I'd surprise her with dinner. The kids were at her mom's for the weekend, and I thought maybe we could reconnect, bridge whatever gap had grown between us. Her car was in the driveway, but the house was quiet. Too quiet. I called her name, my voice echoing off the walls. No answer. Something cold settled in my gut as I climbed the stairs. That's when I heard it. A low murmur, a laugh that wasn't hers, coming from our bedroom. I stood there, hand on the doorknob, heart hammering like a piston. I didn't want to turn it. I didn't want to know, but I had to. The door creaked open, and there she was. Claire, my Claire, tangled in our sheets with him. Ryan, her boss, a man I'd met at company picnics, shaken hands with, even liked. He was tall, slick, always dressed like he belonged in a magazine. And now he was here in my bed with my wife. They didn't see me at first, too caught up in their moment. I stood there, frozen, the world tilting under my feet. I don't know how long I watched before I made a sound. Maybe a second, maybe an hour. Time didn't make sense anymore. It was the creak of the floorboard under my boot that snapped their heads toward me. Claire's eyes widened, her mouth parting in a silent gasp. Ryan scrambled, pulling the blanket up like it could shield him from what was coming. "Dan," she stammered. "It's not. This isn't." But I didn't let her finish. Couldn't. My voice came out low, steady, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Get out." Ryan didn't argue. He grabbed his clothes, fumbling as he darted past me, his shoulder brushing mine. I didn't flinch. Claire stayed where she was, clutching the sheet to her chest, tears welling up. "Dan, please let me explain," she begged. Explain? What was there to explain? I'd seen it. I'd felt it. The betrayal slicing through me like a blade. I turned and walked out, down the stairs, out the front door. I didn't trust myself to stay. The garage became my refuge. I sat there among my tools, the familiar smell of oil and metal grounding me. My hands shook as I gripped a wrench, the cold steel biting into my palm. 12 years, 2 kids, a home, and she'd thrown it all away for, what? A fling with a guy who probably had a new Rolex every year? I kept replaying it, her laugh, his hands, the way she'd looked at him. It wasn't just the act. It was the intimacy, the connection I thought was ours alone. Hours passed. She didn't come after me, didn't call. Maybe she knew better. When I finally went back inside, the house was dark. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "I'm so sorry. I'll stay at my sister's. We need to talk." Sorry. The word felt hollow, meaningless. I crumpled the paper and tossed it in the trash. Sleep didn't come that night. I sat on the couch, staring at the TV screen, seeing nothing. My mind was a storm. Rage, hurt, disbelief swirling together. But under it all, something darker was brewing. A need, not just to hurt her back, but to make her feel what I felt. To make her understand. By morning, I had a plan. Not fully formed, but the seed was there. I wouldn't scream or beg or break things. That wasn't me. I'd always been the fixer. The one who solved problems with my hands and my head. This time, I'd fix it my way. Cruelly. Methodically. She'd taken something from me. My trust. My peace, my family. I'd take something from her too. Something she couldn't get back. The next few days were a blur of pretending. Claire came back to grab some things. Her eyes red. Her voice small. Dan, can we just... She started. But I cut her off. Not now, I said, my tone flat. I didn't look at her. Couldn't. She lingered, then left. The kids came home, and I put on a face for them, smiled, made pancakes, helped with homework. They didn't need to know yet. Not until I was ready. At work, I kept my head down. The guys at the shop noticed I was quieter, but they didn't pry. I threw myself into engines and transmissions, losing hours in the rhythm of it. But every night, alone, I'd sit and think. I started digging, not with a shovel but with information. I checked her phone bill online, hundreds of texts to a number I didn't recognize. Ryan's, I figured. I found his address on a company directory she'd left in a drawer. A nice place, upscale, the kind of house I'd never afford. I drove by it one night just to see. His car, a sleek black Audi, was in the driveway. Lights glowed through the windows. I wondered if she was there, if they were laughing about me. The thought twisted something inside, but I didn't stop. I kept driving, circling back home. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to know how deep this went, how long she'd been lying. Her laptop was still in the house. She hadn't taken it. I'd never been the type to snoop. Felt wrong, invasive. But that was before. I powered it on. Guessed her password. Ellie's birthday. Too easy. And started searching. Emails, mostly work stuff. Then I found a folder buried in her documents labeled recipes. Odd since she barely cooked. Inside were photos. Dozens of them. Her and Ryan at restaurants, a hotel room, a beach I didn't recognize. Smiling. Happy. My stomach churned, but I kept going. There were messages too, saved as screenshots. Miss you already, he'd written. Can't wait to see you again, she'd replied. Dates going back months. I sat back, staring at the screen. This wasn't a mistake, a one-time lapse. This was a life she'd built behind my back. A betrayal so casual, so deliberate, it made my skin crawl. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I closed the laptop, poured a whiskey, and let the anger settle into something sharp and cold. Revenge wasn't just an idea now, it was a promise. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not my brother, not my buddies at the shop. This was mine to carry, mine to fix. But I couldn't stop digging. I started following her, not every day, just enough to see. She told me she was staying at her sister's, but twice I saw her car outside Ryan's place. Once, I parked a block away and watched her slip inside, her hair catching the porch light. She didn't look back, didn't hesitate, like it was her home too. I got smarter about it. Borrowed a buddy's truck so she wouldn't spot mine. Took photos with my phone, timestamps, proof. Not for a lawyer, not yet. For me, for what I was planning. I started tracking Ryan too. Learned his routine, gym at 6, office by 8, drinks with clients some nights. He was predictable, cocky. Thought he'd gotten away with it. At home, I kept up the act. When Claire called about the kids, I was civil. They're fine, I'd say. When you picking them up? She'd mumble something about work, guilt lacing her voice. I didn't push. Let her think I was broken, lost. It gave me space to work. I started collecting things, not evidence, but tools. A burner phone from a gas station. A voice recorder I tested in the garage. A small camera I rigged up from spare parts. I wasn't sure how I'd use them yet, but I'd figure it out. The kids asked questions. Why's mommy not here? Ellie said one night, her brow furrowed. I hugged her, said, "She's just busy, kiddo. She'll be back soon." A lie, but they didn't need the truth yet. Max drew a picture of us, me, him, Ellie, Claire, all holding hands. I stuck it on the fridge, but looking at it hurt. That family was gone. Claire had shattered it, and I was left picking up the pieces. My plan was taking shape, though. It wasn't enough to expose her, to shame her. She'd cry, play the victim, and people would forgive her. Ryan would move on, find another conquest. No, I wanted them to suffer, really suffer. I wanted her to lose what she valued most. Her reputation, her control, her perfect little world. And Ryan, I'd hit him where it hurt too. His pride, his career. I'd make them regret ever crossing me. Started small, my revenge. I didn't rush in, didn't let emotion drive me. That's how you mess up. I'd learned patience fixing engines, rush a job and it falls apart. So I waited, planned, struck when the time was right. First target, her job. Claire loved her career, thrived on it. It was her identity, her escape. I take that from her. I kept her laptop. She hadn't asked for it back. Probably assumed I wouldn't touch it. Big mistake. I went through those emails again, the ones between her and Ryan. Some were flirty, others downright reckless. "Can't wait to get you alone after the meeting," he'd written once. "You're killing me in that dress," she'd replied. All on company accounts. Sloppy. I forwarded them to myself, then deleted the sent copies from her outbox. She'd never know. Next, I dug into Ryan's life. Social media was a goldmine. He posted everything. Photos of his car, his house, his hard-earned success. I found his company's website, his bio boasting about integrity and leadership. Hypocrite. I made an anonymous email account on that burner phone and drafted a message. Attached a few of those emails, kept the text simple. Thought the board might like to see what their VP gets up to. I didn't send it yet. Timing mattered. I tested the waters at home too. Claire came by to see the kids one afternoon. I let her in, played nice. "You look tired," I said, pouring her coffee. She nodded, avoiding my eyes. "Work's been rough." I almost laughed. Rough because she was juggling her lies, no doubt. I slipped the recorder in my pocket, let it run. "You and Ryan still working late?" I asked casual. Her head snapped up, a flicker of panic in her eyes. Yeah, sometimes," she said. "Gotcha." That night, I sat in the garage, piecing it together. The emails would ruin Ryan, maybe get him fired, definitely humiliate him. The recording was leverage with Claire. But it wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel trapped, exposed, powerless. I wanted her to wake up every day wondering when the next blow would come. So I kept building, kept planning. This was just the start. The days after Claire's visit felt like a game of chess. Every move I made was calculated, every word measured. She didn't suspect a thing, not yet. I kept my anger buried deep, letting it fuel me instead of spill out. At work, I'd wrench bolts tighter than necessary, imagining they were her lies, his smug grin. My hands stayed busy, but my mind never stopped spinning. I had the emails, the recording, the photos from my stakeouts. Now I needed to use them. I started with Ryan. His company's board wasn't hard to find. Names and emails listed right on their website, all prim and proper. I tweaked my anonymous message, attached the juiciest emails, and hit send late one night from the burner phone. No going back now. I pictured the fallout. His fancy office buzzing with whispers, his polished reputation cracking like cheap paint. Would they fire him? Suspend him? Didn't matter. The damage would stick. Claire called the next day, voice shaky. "Dan, did you talk to anyone at my work?" I played dumb. "Why would I? What's going on?" She hesitated, then said, "Nothing. Just something weird happened." I could hear it, the paranoia creeping in. Good. Let her squirm. I didn't know if Ryan had warned her yet, but the seed was planted. She'd start looking over her shoulder, wondering who knew. I kept tabs on her through the kids. Ellie mentioned, "Mommy said she might have to change jobs." I nodded, hiding my smirk. "That's so?" Max piped up. She was crying on the phone. That hit me harder than I expected. Not guilt, but a twisted satisfaction. She'd built this mess. Now she'd live in it. I kissed them goodnight, tucked them in, and went back to my garage. The recorder sat on my workbench, her stammering voice trapped inside. I played it again, letting her words sink in. Sometimes, that's all she'd said about Ryan. Enough to damn her. By the end of the week, I heard through a buddy who knew someone at her firm. Ryan was on leave. No details, just rumors of misconduct. I toasted myself with a beer, alone in the dark. Step 1 complete. But Claire still had her job, her friends, her pride. That wouldn't do. I needed to hit closer, make it personal. She'd taken my life apart. I'd dismantle hers, piece by piece. Claire's world revolved around appearances. She loved the praise, the networking, the way people saw her as smart, successful, put together. I decided that's where I'd strike next, her image. Not just at work, but everywhere. I'd found more in her laptop, social media logins she hadn't bothered to change. Sloppy again. I logged in from my burner phone, her curated life laid out in posts and pictures. Smiling with the kids. Captions about family first. Lies stacked on lies. I didn't hack her outright, that'd be too obvious. Instead, I used what I had. Those beach photos with Ryan? I cropped him out, zoomed in on her, and posted them to a local gossip page. Anonymous, of course. Anyone know this woman? Spotted with a guy who's not her husband. Small town like ours, word spreads fast. I watched the comments roll in, some curious, some vicious. Isn't that Claire from the marketing firm? Married, right? Wow. She'd see it eventually. They all would. She called me that night, furious. Dan, what the hell is this? People are texting me about some post. I kept my voice steady. What post? I don't know what you're talking about. She didn't buy it. I could hear the doubt, but she had no proof. If this is you, Dan, you're ruining everything. She snapped. Me? I said, almost laughing. You did that yourself. She hung up, and I sat there, adrenaline pumping. The mask was slipping. Next day, I upped the ante. Printed those emails, hard copies, no digital trail, and mailed them to her sister's place where she was staying. No note, just the pages. Let her explain that to her family. Her sister, Jen, had always been nosy. She'd read them, no question. I imagined the awkward silences, the judgment. Claire's perfect little bubble was popping, and I hadn't even raised my voice. I checked the gossip page later. The post had blown up, hundreds of shares. Her friends were tagging her, asking questions. She'd gone silent online, probably scrambling to delete it all. Too late. The damage was done. I leaned back in my chair, the garage quiet around me. This was better than yelling, better than tears. She was unraveling, and I was just getting started. Claire's family was her anchor, her parents, her sister, the whole tight-knit crew. They'd always liked me, welcomed me in. I'd been the steady son-in-law, the guy who fixed their cars and showed up with a smile. Now I'd turn them against her. Not with lies, but with truth. The mailed emails were step 1. Step 2 was a visit. I drove to her parents' place on a Sunday, kids in tow. Claire wasn't there. She'd been avoiding them, I guessed. Her mom, Linda, hugged me at the door, her eyes worried. Dan, what's going on? Claire won't say much. I sighed, playing the broken husband. It's been rough, Linda. I didn't want to drag you into it. Her dad, Tom, joined us, frowning. Spit it out, son. I didn't spill everything, just enough. She's been seeing someone. Her boss. I caught them. Linda gasped, hand to her mouth. Tom's face hardened. In your house. I nodded, letting the silence do the rest. Ellie tugged my sleeve, oblivious. Can I play in the yard? I sent the kids outside, then handed Linda a folder, copies of the photos, the emails. I didn't want to believe it either, I said. They read in stunned quiet. Linda's eyes teared up. How could she? Tom slammed the table. That girl's lost her mind. I stayed calm, feeding their anger. I'm trying to keep it together for the kids. She won't even talk to me. That sealed it, they were on my side. When Claire showed up later, unannounced, the air shifted. Linda wouldn't look at her. Tom said, "You've got some explaining to do." She glared at me, realizing. Dan, you told them? I shrugged. They deserve to know. She stormed out, but the fracture was there. Her family, her safe haven, was slipping away. I drove home with the kids, their chatter filling the car. I felt no joy, just a grim resolve. Claire's support system was crumbling, and I'd barely lifted a finger. She'd built her life on sand, and I was the tide coming in. Ryan's leave was just the start. Claire's job was still intact, but not for long. I'd overheard her once, bragging about a big client she'd landed. A car dealership chain. Ironic given my trade. I knew the owner, Pete, from years back. Fixed his truck once, swapped stories over beers. Time to call in a favor. I met Pete at his lot, casual-like. Heard you're working with Claire's firm, I said, leaning on a hood. He nodded, proud. Yeah, she's sharp. Closed the deal fast. I let my face fall. Hate to tell you this, Pete, but she's not what she seems. I showed him a photo, her and Ryan, time-stamped during a workday. She's been distracted with her boss. Pete's jaw tightened. You serious? I nodded. Caught them myself. He didn't need much convincing. By the next day, he'd pulled the contract, called her firm, cited unprofessional conduct. Claire's name was on the deal, so the blame would land square on her. I didn't stop there. Sent an anonymous tip to her HR department, attaching more emails. Check your staff's ethics, I wrote. Subtle, but it'd spark an investigation. She called me that night, hysterical. I'm on probation, Dan. Pete canceled. And HR's breathing down my neck. What did you do? I stayed cool. Me? I'm just here with the kids. Sounds like your mess caught up. She sobbed, begged me to stop. I'll lose everything. I hung up, her pleas echoing in my head. Good. Let her feel the walls closing in. Her career, her pride was collapsing, and I was the architect. Claire's friends were next. She had a tight circle, work pals, college buddies, moms from the kids' school. They'd always seen her as flawless, the one who had it all. I stripped that away too. The gossip page had started it, but I needed more. I used her social media again, this time messaging her closest friend, Sarah, from Claire's account. Hey, can we talk? I've been lying to everyone. Sent it, then deleted the evidence. Sarah called her. I'm sure. Claire's phone was buzzing when she came by for the kids' stuff. I overheard her snap. No, I didn't send that. Someone's messing with me. Too late, Sarah would doubt her now. I spread it further. Printed flyers. Nothing fancy. Just her face. Ryan's, a caption. Know these two? Ask about their secret. Left them around town, coffee shops, the park, her gym. People talked. Her friends started pulling away. I saw it at Ellie's soccer game. Claire showed up, and the other moms whispered, turned their backs. She stood alone, clutching her purse, eyes darting. I stayed with Max on the bleachers, watching her isolation grow. She'd always thrived on people, on their approval. Now she had none. I heard later she'd tried a girls' night. Only two showed, and they left early. Her world was shrinking, her allies vanishing. She texted me that night, Dan, please, this has to stop. I'm sorry. I didn't reply. Sorry didn't fix it. She'd betrayed me in the cruelest way, and I'd make sure she felt every ounce of that pain reflected back. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Claire had always been the one who handled our money, bills, savings, the kids' college funds. She liked control, liked knowing we were secure. I trusted her with it, never questioned the numbers. But trust was dead now, and I saw an opening. She'd moved out, but our accounts were still joint. Time to turn that against her. I started small, checking balances online. She'd been sloppy again. Her login was saved on the family computer. I found withdrawals I didn't recognize, hundreds here, 1,000 there, going back months. Hotel charges, dinners, a weekend trip I'd never heard about. All while I was scraping by at the shop. My jaw clenched as I pieced it together. She'd been funding her little affair with our money. My money. The kids' future. I didn't confront her. That'd be too easy. Instead, I drained the accounts. Not all at once. Didn't want it flagged, but steadily. Moved it to a new account she couldn't touch. One I'd set up with the burner phone. Left just enough in the joint one to cover basics. Let her think it was fine. Then I called the bank, played the worried husband. My wife's been acting strange. Can you freeze her cards? I'm worried she's in trouble. They did it, no questions. She figured it out fast. Showed up at the house, pounding on the door. Dan, what the hell? My cards declined everywhere. I opened it, leaned on the frame. Weird. Maybe it's a glitch. Her face twisted, anger, panic. This is our money. You can't just... I cut her off. Our money? Like the cash you spent on him. She froze, guilt flashing in her eyes. She knew I knew. Fix it, Dan, she demanded. But I shut the door. Let her scramble. Next day, I heard from Jen. She'd borrowed from her sister, but Jen was tapped out too. Claire was broke, humiliated, begging for scraps. I kept the kids fed, clothed, safe. She couldn't say the same. Her cushy life was gone, and I'd made sure of it. Every dollar she'd stolen from us was a nail in her coffin. Claire wasn't just losing things. She was losing herself. I saw it in her face when she picked up the kids. Hollowed out, shadows under her eyes. She'd always been vibrant, confident. Now she was a ghost. I didn't stop pushing. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done. Not just in her wallet, but in her soul. I started with the kids, not to hurt them, never that, but to shift their view. Mommy's been really busy, I'd say when they asked. She's got a lot going on. Subtle, but it planted seeds. Ellie, sharp as she is, picked up on it. Is Mommy mad at us? She asked one night. I hugged her. No, kiddo. She's just figuring stuff out. Let Claire explain why she wasn't around. Then I sent her something personal. Found an old photo, our wedding day, her in that white dress, me grinning like an idiot. Wrote on the back, "Remember this?" Mailed it to Jen's place, no return address. She texted me after, a mess of words. Why are you doing this? I can't take it. I didn't answer. Let her stare at that promise she'd broken. Let it burn. Her calls got desperate. Left voicemails I didn't delete. Kept them as trophies. Dan, I'm falling apart. I need you to stop. Please. Her voice cracked, raw. I listened. Felt nothing but cold triumph. She'd ripped my heart out in our bed. This was her turn to bleed. Friends gone. Family distant. Job teetering. Money dried up. She was alone with her choices now. I saw her at the park once. Sitting on a bench, staring at nothing. Max waved, but she didn't see. I turned him away, kept walking. She was breaking, and I'd barely touched her. The worst was still coming. Time to go big. I chipped away at her life, job, friends, family, money, mind. Now I'd stripped the last layer, her dignity. She'd kept up a front, pretending she could weather it. I'd shatter that illusion for everyone to see. I'd save the best from her laptop, videos. Not many, but enough. Her and Ryan, laughing in a hotel room, her voice teasing, his hands on her. She'd filmed it, probably thought it was cute. I didn't watch long, couldn't stomach it, but I knew their power. Edited them down, blurred Ryan's face just enough. Hers stayed clear. I didn't post them myself, too risky. Used a guy I knew, shady type from the shop's rougher days. Gave him the files, cash, instructions. Leak it. No trace to me. He grinned, didn't ask questions. 2 days later, it hit, a private link circling town, then beyond. People whispered at the grocery store, stared at me with pity. I played dumb, shrugged it off. Rough times, I'd say. Claire found out fast. Showed up at my door, screaming. You monster. You put that out there. I stayed calm. What are you talking about? She lunged, fists pounding my chest. Everyone's seen it. My life's over. I grabbed her wrists, held her still. You did this. Not me. She collapsed, sobbing. I stepped back, let her fall. Neighbors peeked out. More witnesses to her ruin. The fallout was brutal. Her firm cut ties, no probation, just gone. Jen kicked her out, ashamed. The kids' school called, parents complaining, wanting her banned from events. She had nothing left to hide behind. I'd exposed her, raw and ugly, to the world she'd cared so much about. Claire vanished after that. Not physically, still in town crashing somewhere cheap, but she was a shell. I heard she'd tried a lawyer, but with no proof tying me to anything, it went nowhere. I'd been careful, burner phones, proxies, middlemen. She could suspect, but she couldn't touch me. The kids noticed. "Mommy doesn't smile anymore," Max said, coloring at the table. Ellie added, "She looks sad all the time." I nodded, kept it light. "She's just tired, guys. We're okay here." And we were. I had full custody now. She'd signed it over, too broken to fight. The house was mine, the kids were mine. I'd won. But it didn't feel like winning. Nights were quiet, too quiet. I'd sit in the garage, tools idle, staring at nothing. She'd betrayed me, destroyed us, and I'd crushed her for it. Yet the hole in my chest stayed. I'd pictured this moment, her ruined, me standing tall. But the triumph was hollow. Anger had driven me, kept me going. Now it was gone, and what was left? I saw her once at the gas station. Thin hair limp, eyes dull. She didn't look at me, just paid and left. I almost called out, almost asked if she was okay. But I didn't. She'd made her choice. I'd made mine. We were strangers now, tied only by the wreckage. I kept moving, work, kids, routine. Life went on. But the victory tasted like ash. I'd torn her apart, and it hadn't fixed me. Maybe it never would. Months passed. Spring turned to summer, then fall. The kids adjusted. Ellie stopped asking. Max stopped drawing her in pictures. I rebuilt, slow and steady. Shop picked up, friends checked in. Life settled, scarred but stable. Claire faded from talk. People moved on, found new scandals. I thought I had too. Then she called. Late, out of nowhere. "Dan," she said, voice faint. "I'm leaving. Wanted you to know." I gripped the phone. "Where?" She paused. "Doesn't matter. Just, I'm sorry. For everything." I didn't speak, couldn't. "Take care of them," she added, then hung up. Next day, Jen confirmed it. Claire was gone, no forwarding address. Left a note saying she needed a fresh start. I sat with that, heavy. She'd run, finally broken beyond repair. I'd done that. Me. The man who'd loved her once. Who'd built a life with her. I took the kids to the park that weekend. They ran ahead, laughing, free. I watched, a ghost of a smile on my face. Revenge had cost me time, peace, pieces of myself. But it had cost her more. She'd betrayed me in a way I'd never imagined. And I'd answered with a cruelty I didn't know I had. Was it worth it? I still don't know. The sun set, the kids called me over, and I went. Life kept turning. Claire was gone, her world in ruins. Mine stood, battered but whole. That was enough. It had to be.